former minister and founder of Something or Other Publishing, Wade Franson, is the host of Created in the Image of God, a series that examines the role of religion in society, from messianic returns to the emotive responses transmitted through our culture. Wade fearlessly addresses reality claims from all directions, objectively exploring their compatibility with Holy Scripture. Tonight's episode, The Koran for Beginners, Part 2, with Mekye Abdus Salaam.
Greetings, everyone. This is Wade Franson. I'm your host of Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. We have a special treat tonight, a reappearance, the second coming, sorry, pun intended, but perhaps somewhat disrespectful, but nonetheless, the second time we have Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam on the show. Actually, that's even wrong. It's the third time. This is the third time. First time kind of didn't count because the audio was bad. People couldn't hear him. Last time he gave an introduction to the Quran, and I kind of derailed him, as I often do with our guests, and we got into some specific issues and weren't able to complete that overview. So we wanted to have him back and share more tonight about the Quran, about what it means to be an imam. And it's an interesting evening to do it. He brought me greetings from a friend who said, please tell him to enjoy the holy day or the holiday. And his friend knew that tonight is the beginning of Nowruz, which is the new year for in Persia, but also for Baha'is worldwide. We are celebrating the new year, the feast of Nowruz, and also it's the conclusion of a monthly fast. So I was scarfing my food down right before this. I apologize if I might have a piece of rice or chicken in my teeth tonight. But without any further fun and games, I'm going to bring Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam into the studio. Welcome, my friend. How are you this evening?
I'm doing well. Thank you again for inviting me to this amazing platform that you have. And yes, I know Liz is probably listening to you right now. And I was sharing with, as I was sharing with you before we came on the air, it's really impressive that she knew more about your holiday or your special day, the New Year. And this was something that I was uninformed of. So like I said, I'm around a lot of people who are like-minded like us, really trying to understand the role of religion in society as a whole. And I think it's amazing, so thank you for the invite again.
Well, it's a wonderful synergy here between your platform, which is the Interfaith Library, and what we've been doing together there. And as my dad used to always say, me and you, mostly you. So you're the the one doing that work and allowing me to participate a little bit in it from a Baha'i perspective. Anyway,
Well,
so
it's pretty big, so I mean, don't dismiss that.
well, let's just dive into it. So right before we were going here, and I'm going to give you full stage so I can have another couple of bites to eat while you talk. But
Okay.
I'm going to give you full stage to share, what would you like for the audience to know and understand about the Quran here on your second appearance talking about Quran for beginners, your third time on the show. What are some of the things that you would have gotten to last time had I not derailed you into those side discussions?
Well, first and foremost, I would like to first start with a very important factor for our brothers and sisters who may or may not know much about Islam or may not be Muslim. The Quran and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran itself that this is not a brand new revelation, that this is a revelation that came to confirm two of the previous revelations that came. And the reference to those two revelations are the Torah and the Bible. And in Islam, we call it the Torah as the book to Moses or Musa, and the Injil, which is the Gospels, was given to Christ. We also acknowledge that there was revelation between those two books. One we ascribe to David, which is called the Zabor, which is presently or in present day translated as the Psalms. And the other narrative was given to Solomon, which is presently translated as being the Proverbs. So there is a chain, or an isnad, as we say in Islam, a chain of narration that stems throughout the course of revelation. And we as Muslims believe that the Quran, being the seal of these revelations, came because there were interpolations or misrepresentations or misinterpretations, things that were added or things that were taken out of these divine books, leaving a lot of what was considered or has been identified as revelation of the previous books to be in question. You know, there are scholars in the Christian faith and scholars in the Jewish faith that will sit there and decipher what material has been untouched and what material has not been touched. In Islam, this is not an issue with us. For since the 7th century in Revelation, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam received revelation from the angel Gabriel or Jibril. It was a night that he was in a cave called Hira, and he was distraught, depressed, was not happy with the condition of his people, the world that he lived in. Polytheism, the worship of multiple gods, was prevalent in the land. And this was disturbing to him because he understood originally that this was not the legacy or the teachings of his own people, which were the tribe known as the Quraysh. And he was actually from a prominent family within the Qurayshi tribe called the Beni Hashem, or the clan of Hashem, all of being Qurayshi people. But I bring this up because in Islam, our chain of narration, our isnad, goes back to Abraham through his son Isaac. Subhanallah, goes to his son Ishmael, where the Christian Judeo ideology goes through his son Isaac.
So let me jump in here and pause you for a moment. You said so many things that I found really interesting that I did not know. I'll touch on a couple of them. So, and you may not be aware that the average Christian, and even some like myself who have a degree in theology and studied the Bible and religion all my life, would be ignorant of such things. One of which is that you hold a special place for David and Solomon for the Psalms and Proverbs. That was just interesting and kind of fascinating. But another thing that I found interesting was the perspective that the Muhammad as a seal is also clarifying certain things that, as you mentioned, would have been altered. Now, students of the Bible typically know this warning from the book of Revelation, chapter 22. I'm going to go ahead and post it here in the chat and show it here. It won't all show. The first part will. A warning, chapter or verse 18 of chapter 22. I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book, the book of Revelation. If anyone adds to these things, God will add to him the plagues that are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from him the words of this book, of this prophecy, God will take away his part from the book of life, from the holy city, and from the things which are written in this book. So a very, very serious warning that is frankly often applied by the Christian community to target the Quran. And I just find it fascinating if one stops to reflect for a moment on the well-known fact that the book was altered prior to Muhammad. Now, we diminish and discount those alterations because most of them, I shouldn't say that, but many of them are known. For example, I studied this one passage. I'm not going to really get into it because it's a divisive topic, but there was a passage inserted into the Gospels um, about something that is confirming a doctrine, that is reinforcing a doctrine that was introduced, frankly, hundreds of years after Jesus. And this doctrine is disputed in some corners of Christianity, though the vast majority of Christianity accepts this doctrine. But here we have an example of text that was inserted by perhaps a well-meaning monk to reinforce a doctrine that he believed that probably he felt needed some additional support because there are those who believe you can't really substantiate it. So that's just one example of alterations that were made to the book long before Muhammad. And so it's interesting, and we talked about this last time, this aspect of time, right? Things are written at a given moment in time, and they're given to a people at a time in a language that they can grasp and understand, and in the context of when they exist and when they're able to comprehend it, based on the language and the understanding that they have, right? So fast forward, your position, the position of the Quran, the position of Islam is that Muhammad called out some of these alterations that had occurred prior to him that would have been the kind of thing that the book of Revelation warned against.
Right.
So it's interesting to view Muhammad and the Quran as a protective measure, not a corrupting measure.
Right.
This is a really, really interesting perspective, one that I had never heard before and never considered.
Well, if I can add to what you just shared, that I wasn't really hitting far, and I love the idea of how you approach the issue of not, because we don't want to be divisive. This is not my intent here with the show. But yeah, doctrines are one aspect, and since we're mentioning a doctrine or the doctrine, it wasn't necessarily like you said, an intentional evil or a misrepresentation or a misleading thing. And I don't want to say I believe so. We understand from the history of Christendom, or at the time, the Hebrew people, there was this debate amongst the multitude about who Christ was. And I think that the purpose of the doctrine, or the community that put the doctrine together, was to have a unified voice so that there would be no divisiveness within the church itself. I think the problem comes with, again, if God is all omnipotent and all knowing, then there is no change or nothing that we as a human being with lesser capacity of thinking and planning could ever do to correct something that he's already put in motion. There's a verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. In translation, it's loosely translated as there is no change in God's speech, because his speech is perfect. So when we talk about his speech, we're talking about if we look at God's speech as being imperfect, that means he has to go back and change revelation to fix what he's messed up. La tabdila li kalimatullah. There is no change in my speech because my speech is perfect. There's no change in my action because my action is perfect. So before God created any and everything, he already knew the future. And you have to understand, as a human intellect, the present only is established because the past has just passed. So we're living in the present all the time. So the past is just what we just spoke about is now the past. It's a historical record. God knew this conversation was going to happen way before you and I even had it. So in order for us to say, well, there has to be a revelation that has to come now because you and I are now entertaining another conversation that leads the multitude to a whole different thinking process. We're saying God didn't know this was going to happen, and therefore he has to correct this in the future. So another revelation has to
Well, so
behind.
let me clarify. I'm not saying that at
No, I'm not
all.
saying
What I'm
we are.
saying
I'm
is
just saying
that
hypothetically for
right,
the world. I'm not saying
right.
you and I.
But to clarify perhaps the audience as well, you know, the creator of everything, we've been able to grasp some of the brightest minds, you know, we've mentioned Einstein before. Some of the brightest, intelligent, inspired human minds have been able to understand the mechanism that causes time or that describes time, right? Relativity. And so it is the operation and the functioning of the universe that generates the concept of time, that delivers time. So whoever created that is obviously outside of it, and time has a
Absolutely.
completely different meaning. So the awareness of everything that existed in that thing that was created, including the dimension of time, is full and complete. However, one of the things you were talking about is how you like to have people that you share the Quran with start in chapter 19 if they're Christian, because of their awareness, because of their comprehension, because of their limitations of understanding.
Exactly.
I mean, they might be much, much smarter than you when it comes to the Bible and Christianity, but they know nothing of the Quran. And so allowing them to start in chapter 19 opens the book up to them in a new and different
And
way.
if you may, can
In
you explain
that
what
way,
chapter 19?
and let me finish the thought. In that way, God speaks, reveals to people of a certain awareness, understanding, and context. So the aspect and the facet of his revelation that he shares with them is fitting and appropriate for them at that time. That's what I was
No,
saying.
what I was going
Anyway,
to
go
ask you,
ahead.
you were just saying I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were just saying chapter 19, and there may be people in the audience that don't know what chapter 19 is, and I was going to ask you to explain.
I don't either.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't
Okay.
either, but
So chapter,
I think I have a general sense based on our conversation, but you didn't actually tell me what chapter 19
okay.
says.
So chapter 19 is the story of Mary or Maryam. And one of the things that has been attributed to Muslims and those who follow Islam is that, as profound as our writings may be and our teachings may be, and as disciplined as our behaviors may be, a lot of people have a hard time grasping it because, one, they say we don't believe in the Christ, which is so not true. And you can't be Muslim without the acknowledgement and the true belief in Christ. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Quran that Isa is the Messiah. He said, the Masihi Isa ibn Maryam, the Messiah, Jesus Christ, the son of Maryam, is of his Qalam, is his word, and is of his ruh. And he uses the word ruh, the spirit, in first person. He said, Ruhi, my ruh. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is claiming the spirit and the life and the power and the majesty and those gifts that were bestowed Christ came from him. And Christ has said this in scriptures on numerous occasions. I do nothing of my own accord. He also said that what I do is do the will of the Father. So this is the Quran actually acknowledges and confirms what the scriptures have said. The problem is through interpretation, people put their own spin to what that means. And the problem comes because most people don't know the original language. In the Old Testament, we know the Old Testament was Hebrew. And when you're talking about the New Testament, we know the New Testament was written in Greek, which is even more problematic because the people of Christ spoke the Aramaic language. So it had to be translated from Aramaic to, some say, to Latin, and then from Latin to Greece. So through that translation there, or that transmission, there had to be a loss of linguistic understanding or interpretation or translation along the way. And if I can just give one good example, and I'm going to keep it in English, the word awful, AWEFUL. If I ask the audience today, what does the word awful mean? Most people, if they're not academically astute or English professors or teachers, will say that awful has this negative connotation. It means that
horrible.
Something is not, it's horrible.
It means horrible.
Something is not good. But when the word awful was introduced into the English language, it meant full of awe. Awful. A person who was awful was full of awe. But over time, this meaning has changed. And so when people learn the language, they learn it from the language in their present time and not realizing that it meant something in the beginning. And this is one of the beauties of the Quran, because it's written in the same language. Muslim, even Christian adherents who speak the Arabic language understand to address the Arabic language of the Quran, the Bible, or the Torah in its main sense from the time it was represented, not as we understand it today, because God's word doesn't change, because God is perfect, because God doesn't make mistakes. It means the same as it always meant from the very beginning.
Amen. So allow me to tie this in with something directly from the New Testament. And again, I'll show it. This is Matthew chapter 5 and verse 18. For assuredly I say to you, Jesus said, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. And people don't really know what a jot is or a tittle is, right? A jot is this 10th letter, the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And the tittle is, it has to do with the lack of vowels. It signifies, what vowel was to be spoken. So if you lose one of these things, you could probably still get it right, but on occasion you would get it wrong.
Exactly.
And so here Jesus is saying exactly what you're saying about the importance of maintaining integrity, and that God, the sovereign, almighty creator and sustainer of the universe, would ensure that his word would not return unto him empty. It would fulfill the purpose for which it was sent with full and complete accuracy. And there are many examples of Jesus telling the disciples, this had to happen because prophecy had to be fulfilled. Peter, cutting off the ear of the servant of the high priest, a fulfillment of a prophecy from the Old Testament. And there are many examples like that about how meticulous. And so the awful approach that Muslims have to the Quran is something to admire.
And to add, you just was going somewhere, to add to that, and it's beautiful how we synchronize. Whether we agree on everything or not, it's not the issue. But another beauty of the Quran is that God, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, said that of all the revelations that came before it, this one he was going to protect himself. That he's not going to allow man to misrepresent it, misinterpret it, mistranslate it, miswrite it. And the proof in that is you can take a Muslim from any country around the world, and we can start reciting the Quran, from the very first Surah al-Fatiha, which is the opening of the Quran, all the way to Suratul Nas, which is the ending of the Quran, 114 chapters, 6,236 verses. If I start reciting from the beginning, going all the way to the end, a Muslim, no matter where he's at or she's at in the world, will follow along. And the moment, going back to what you added, I change a diacritical, a vowel, a letter, or anything, if it's changed, they immediately, A'udhu Billah, subhanallah, and they'll correct it immediately, because it can be something so subtle as the changing of a diacritical or the replacement or the lack of proper enunciation of a particular letter, a vowel or consonant, that'll change the meaning of the word. And sometimes that meaning is so detrimental that it changes the context or the intent as well. Simple words like qalb and kalb. The difference in English, if we were spelling it in English, it would be Qalb and Kalb. If you're lazy in your speech, the difference between the two is a heart and a dog. And the reference of calling somebody a dog in the Arabic culture is heinous. It's like using a profane.
Not a good
No,
thing.
not at all. And your intent may not have been to do that. It's just because you were lazy in your speech. And this.
So the phrase "What up, dog?" doesn't fly in the Muslim world.
And you would never even do. You would be cognizant to do that in the culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to dive into some specifics. By the way, we've had a lot of interesting comments in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you. I want to keep them coming because we're gonna have some giveaway here later for those who are commenting in the chat. This commercial break will be a video promoting the Interfaith Library, which Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam is the founder of, and is doing a tremendous amount of great work. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back with more Quran for beginners. And we'll get into some things that are maybe a little bit more advanced as well. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. I'm your host, Wade France, and I'm here with Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam. We are covering Quran for beginners, and we're going to get into a question that both helps the beginners and might be a little bit more challenging for some. So, and I'm a Baha'i, but even before I became a Baha'i, I became aware of some symbolism in the Bible. I'm a former Christian minister, in which when Jesus was crucified, the veil in the temple was ripped in two. And that veil symbolized a doorway, a slight barrier that kept people from entering into the Holy of Holies. And the high priest was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies once a year on the day of Yom Kippur to make intercession for the people. And in Christian theology, Jesus Christ is the high priest. And when he was crucified, the veil in the temple was ripped in two, signifying access to God, to the Shekinah, to the glory of God in a way that was not previously possible, because only the high priest could go in once a year and then with the sprinkling of blood. So I began to get the idea that in my role as a minister, and some of the challenges that I saw and felt personally were because of the tendency for a person functioning in the role of a priest or a minister to get in the way of people's experience of God, that rather than being a facilitator, one could also be a barrier. So all of that was a swirl in my understanding when I resigned from the ministry, largely, as I say, to separate my faith from my paycheck, which is the primary reason I did it. But it led to a lot of reflection on the difference between the individual and his or her direct relationship and access to the divine, and the role of a priest or a minister. So this led to all of these thoughts informed my view of perhaps why in the Baha'i faith there's no clergy. There are many other reasons. So I wrote a blog on the Interfaith Library about this aspect, and it engendered a lot of discussion, some of which I found interesting and fascinating. Some of the reasons why people felt that what I had written was probably not certainly not the full picture, which it isn't, but maybe even not so much accurate or healthy, to put it in a different way. So that was an interesting discussion. So I wanted to ask Imam Mekye to tell us a little bit about the role of an imam in the Quran and in the religion of Islam. And that's kind of the context of where some of this is coming from, but feel free to address it or explain it in any way. I'm not really specifically asking that question or issuing a challenge to it. I'm just providing some context here.
Well, it's the imam, the position of an imam is very interesting in Islam because there's, as the young people may say today, there's levels to this. It is fundamentally understood that every father is the head of the household. So he initially starts off being the imam of the household. So outside of, the academic structure, here is a man who may be limited in his ability to, far as be a teacher from a classroom or formal state, but his job nevertheless is diminished because it's his responsibility as the leader of his household, as the man of the family. It's to make sure that the family is protected, nurtured, and adhere to the injunctions, provisions, and the laws of Islam, inspiring the worship and being able to present an environment where worship is doable. Outside that, the next level of imam, what most people are fundamentally astute to, is the academic, the person who spent years and years and years of studying. It's not just the Quran, but the other extraneous resources that clarifies the Quran, such as knowing the hadiths, the levels and the grades of hadiths. Hadiths are the sayings, the actions, and the silent approbations of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what he said, what he did, what he approved of. So all of these things come to shore up or explain the Quran because he was the living example, as Christ, Isa alayhi salam, was the example for the Christians, and then we have the spiritual leader who leads in prayer, who is the consult to the community as a whole. And this person may even have a special heightened academic achievement. We have what we call hafiz, people who are memorizers of the Quran, letter for letter. We have qadis, judges, people who know the legal legislation, and they are to judge between right and wrong, sort of like the story of Solomon in the Bible, when the children, when the wife, there was a conflict of a baby, and the two women were claiming that the baby were there, and he said, well, since this is what you both profess, cut the baby in half and parcel out both. And the actual mother was like, no, she can have the baby. And because of her willingness to save the baby, he was able to judge her character and understand, no, this is the mother. And then whatever the consequences or punishment for the woman who was giving false testimony was also under his rule. So we have the imam who holds that position. We also have imams who study what we call jurisprudence or fiqh. And jurisprudence are the legal legislations from a community aspect. How do we walk? How do we talk? How do we bathe? How do we eat? How do we go to our wives? What is the conduct of a child to his parents? What is the conduct from the parent to the community, and so on and so on? So there's levels to this. There is no imam who encapsulates all of these jobs. As far as my title is concerned, I was academically trained to be an imam. I spent almost 30 years of studying, which allowed me to study various Islamic subjects, even what we would consider secular, mathematics and English and science. But more so, I adhere to a particular school of jurisprudence. So therefore, when I am with my companions or my community, I can disseminate or explain information logistically from our particular school, because as we're talking today, there is no one system of things that a person has on lock when it comes to the approach of God. In fact, one of our caliphs, who was one of the earlier converts or reverts to Islam, was a companion, which was the son-in-law and the first cousin of the Prophet Muhammad. His name was Ali. And Ali was not only a champion and was feared, as a fierce physical champion to Islam, but he also was very academically astute. In fact, when people debated about the being of God, the being of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would say, in translation, a term that resonates probably with you and other people who understand the oneness of God in a singularity or a single form. He said, anything you imagine God to be, he is different from what you imagine, because God created the mind. He created the brain. So anything that it can create, it means it's something that God has bestowed on that individual to be able to create it. How can he be what he created? And this is one of the problems we have about, and again, I'm not being divisive, and I hope I'm being respectful to the audience who may feel indifferent to this. But this is one of the issues we have when it comes about Christ. We acknowledge the status or the title of Christ as being the Messiah, but in acknowledging that, we do not attribute him as being God, the creator of the heavens and earth, for many factors. One, because of his own testimony, his own word, scriptures, things he said that had been translated to be something else because of these doctrines. And two, something simple. If we go back to the Old Testament, first commandment of the Bible says what? I am the Lord thou God. There is no God but me. And then my question to those who are trying to proselytize to me, was this Jesus talking, or was this the creator of the heavens and the earth? And then all of a sudden, here comes this conversation. Well, this is a complex issue, because what you're not doing is incorporating the doctrine. Well, the doctrine was established in the year 325, almost 300 years after Christ. And again, like you said, even amongst the Christian faith, there are differences of opinion about, the status. But so basically what Muslims debate when it comes to the reference of his godship is based on his own testimony or his own words, his own scriptures, scriptures or texts that were written about him that makes no to us makes no sense when he says something totally different. Example, the two I think you brought up, the cutting of the ear. If we go back to the Garden of Gethsemane, when Christ went to pray, who was he praying to? He was asking God for relief of the situation. However, if your will, let your will be done. But like, this is a burden on me. So he was openly saying that even if we accept the fact that Christ was crucified and was on the cross, he says, Father, my God, using the Arabic word Allah, it's in the Bible written. He said, why have thou forsaken me? Who was he talking to? Himself? Again, these are things that are complicated for us to address. So when people talk to us and then you try to be all scientific and philosophical and then this is an issue, because now you're trying to make these flowery things to explain something that simplistically doesn't make.
Well,
I'm saying
let me share let me share a little story. So the religious organization that I was in the European ministry, and our denomination, we weren't technically a denomination because of the very doctrine that you are addressing. We were not adherent to some of the doctrines of orthodoxy, but we were very large. We had churches in over 120 countries, and so the European ministry were gathered at this conference, and we had been asked to view 26 hours of videotape. This is back in the day when VHS was king. And we had to watch 26 hours of lectures discussing the nature of God, all around, how God is a Trinity and why the Trinity is the doctrine and should be accepted. And this doctrine drove a wedge through the ministry worldwide, as it was sought to teach the entire ministry that this should be accepted, whereas previously it was not accepted. So I was part of the European ministry and attended this session. And because I'd had that particular professor when I was getting my degree, I was able to use some of the things he taught me to refute some of the things he was now teaching me. Certain methods around exegesis and how to address the Word of God and address the original language and what is poetry and what is metaphor and what is literature versus what is intended to be doctrine, right? And at the end of it, he said, well, if you're going to use that, you can't really prove anything with the Bible. And I said, well, then what are you saying? He said, well, this is the most reasonable conclusion I can come to. And there were others who came to a different conclusion based on their reason, to your point about interpretation. But the reason I'm bringing up this story is this issue split the church globally right down the middle. This issue caused a schism. So I don't like to address this issue at all, because to your point, thou shalt not make any graven images. The minute we form a conception of God in our mind, we might not yet have created a sculpture or a painting or an icon to bow down to, but in our mind, we already have, in the same sense that Jesus said, if you even look at a woman with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart.
Yep.
Therefore, if you're beholden to your concept of God such that it causes a division amongst the brethren, then clearly that's not God at work.
Right. And the irony.
So
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, so the discussion on the nature of God, you can have your opinion, I can have mine, but I don't believe we should be having doctrine about the nature of God, except to say what he has said. "Hear, O Israel, your God is one," right? Which has been the Shema, which has been repeated in multiple religions. God
That
is
is one.
one. There is
And
one
actually,
God.
that's our testimony to become Muslim. We say, La ilaha illallah. There is no ilah. There is no God. And the word ilah in this context is toguts, things that can be worshipped, whether it's your money, whether it's statues, idols, or like you said, icons. There is no ilah but the one who created the heavens and the earth, all that's seen and unseen. And here is the other thing, and this is and my brothers and sisters who may be watching or may have it, please, correct me if I'm saying something wrong, but I think there would be no divisiveness between Christians and Muslims if this wasn't no debate about a doctrine. If we truly stood to the first commandment, I am the Lord thou God, there is no God but me, and understanding that the Muslim or the Islamic tenet, to be a Muslim, we don't have to have water sprinkled on us or all of these other little rituals. All we have to do is testify out of our mouth, there is only one God, and he's the creator of all that exists and he's the creator of all that's seen and unseen, and then believe it in our heart. This makes you Muslim. This is why we also say that the Christian and a Jew can be a Muslim, but a Muslim can't be a Christian and a Jew. And the reason I say that is not because of the religion, but more so because of the act of submission, the act of obeying God by the bylaws that you possess. So, if you go to a point and be like, I never heard, I don't know the revelations of the Quran, I don't know what the directives are. All right, well, what is the directives in the Bible? If God say don't do something in the Bible, why are you doing it? There's a verse in the Quran says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, La tabdila, subhanallah, hurimat alaykumul mayta wa dam wa lahim khinzir. Forbidden unto you is meat that has not been slaughtered properly or in my name, blood, and the flesh of the pig. And these are the things. So universally, I say to Christians and Jews, well, the Jewish people have kosher, so they hold strong to it. Muslims have halal, we hold strong to it. Similar to same principle of slaughtering, the same principle of what should be eaten, what shouldn't be eating. And then here we go in the middle with this grace or this mercy. Now we have people that are eating meat that is not slaughtered properly, consuming things that may be considered blood, and or eating the flesh of the pig. And when I asked why are they doing that, and said, well, because when Christ came, Christ made all things good. Well, show me that verse in the Bible where he specifically told you that pork is permissible to eat, that blood is permissible to consume, that eating meat that has not been slaughtered properly in the name of God, that should be consumed. And it's always something ambiguous, something that has been interpreted instead of a direct word. And we don't have this issue in the Quran. It's a direct word. Do this and don't do that. We don't have to speculate what that means. When God says honor your parents, we honor them. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Yes, sir. No, sir. When he says to our teachers, it's the same respect. I'm 57 years old, and amongst my teachers, whether they're older or younger, they still get that respect. And this is the thing I think we are losing. If we're going to call ourselves people of spirituality, then be obedient to the laws that God gave us from the revelation in which you possessed. If I can add to, when I talk about the narration or the chain of revelation up to the Quran, what we all know about the Torah, we know about the Psalms and the Proverbs and the Gospels, and then some may even acknowledge the Quran. But what we don't understand or talk about in most cases are those revelations, and we talked about this in our last show, the revelations that came before it, the suhufs. We're talking about the revelation that was given to Adam, the revelation that was given to Enoch or Idris, the revelation that was given to Adam's son, Sheath or Seth, the revelation that was given to Abraham. People didn't understand that they had the original laws. Now, who were they worshiping? They were worshiping the one God. they were in opposition of those people who were polytheists, worshiping more than one God. And this is the only thing that Muslims are calling the world back to. Let's go back to the fundamentals and worship one God, whether you call him Jehovah, Yahweh, Allah, Elohim. We acknowledge that God has all of these names depending on where you're from, linguistically, what you're attributing to. We're still acknowledging the creator of the heavens and the earth. That's all seen. And that's one of the things, too, I'm glad about your show that I can articulate. We don't worship a false God. We don't worship a whole nother God. We worship the same God. We have the same prophets, the same lineage. We follow the same messages that came up through time. The problem comes is that when it comes to Christianity, the seal stops with Christ. Nothing comes after. When it comes to Judaism, they're still waiting for the Messiah to come. And the Muslims saying that he's already come. He's already came, and we need to put this back in order. I can't speak about the Baha'is because you talk so beautifully and eloquently, but it sounds like Baha'u'llah, done the same thing the Prophet Muhammad did. He was saying,
well, to be honest,
together. I'm just saying, I don't know. I can't
right.
speak on it.
Well, and I don't want to I don't want to go there because I don't want to detract from anything you're saying, but I will share. Looking back in time, I'll share another verse, which of course it has always been one of my favorite. Luke 6 verse 46. Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things which I say?" One of the challenges that I have always had, even when I was a Christian, was the degree to which people love to profess things. But when it comes to doing things, right, it's much harder to walk the walk. It's much easier to talk the talk. So one of the things that I admire and respect about what I'm hearing is the diligence, the sincerity. So, for example, I was actually talking to a member of the LDS Church, the Latter-day Saints, today. It was a coincidental discussion, and suddenly we found ourselves talking about history, Joseph Smith, what he did. And I shared with this gentleman that I attended a Mormon service once. This was a sort of an open church day. They invited people who didn't normally come. And I went and I was moved to tears. I was moved to tears at their worship service because of the sincerity, the dedication. Mormons wear white undergarments because of their understanding of a certain verse about wearing white. And so whether that's right or wrong, whether one's understanding is even right or wrong, there is a beauty in not being a hypocrite
being sincere
about what you profess, right? If you're going to call Jesus Lord, then you had better study what he said and not pretend that you know him when you're not doing the things that he told you to do.
Absolutely.
And let's say for a moment that Jesus is God. Well, then you're taking God's name in vain. And I think you're taking God's name in vain anyway. If you take Jesus' name on your lips, even if he's not God, you're taking God's name in vain by professing to be a follower of Jesus and not taking seriously obedience to his commands. And yes, he said, I give you a new command, love one another. But the 10 commandments describe how to love one another. You can't break one of those commandments and claim that you're loving your brother when you're lying, cheating, stealing, coveting, right?
Disobeying your parents.
All pervasive, right? Yeah. Coveting, wanting something that somebody else has. Yeah. What a transformation if we taught thou shalt not covet. It seems like today we teach thou shalt covet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thou shalt desire that which your neighbor has. Thou shalt desire. Yep.
But that goes back to what, I was pointing out earlier. you know, if you hold to the position that the New Testament abrogated the Old Testament, then again, you're saying God made a mistake and he's correcting it. And as a Muslim, is submitted to the will of the divine word, that is a hard pill to swallow, whether I wear a kufi or I wear a collar or I'm wearing a Jewish. That's a hard pill to swallow. Like,
Well,
no.
but let me unpack that for a moment. So, how does the Quran view Noah?
The Quran acknowledges him, as, let's just say,
And let me explain why I'm asking. I'm
no,
asking
okay,
because in the Jewish tradition, you have the Noahide covenant, the Noahide laws, and there's this thing in Judaism called the righteous among the nations. And the righteous among the nations is an attribution to those who during the Holocaust laid down their own life for their brother, a Jew, right? Somebody who extended themselves and put themselves at risk to save a member of the Jewish people during the Holocaust is accounted as righteous among the nations. But when you dig down deeper, there were 7 laws that Noah brought. And if you adhered to those 7 laws, you would be considered righteous among the nations, right? The Gentiles, the peoples who were not Jews. So the Jewish people believe that the revelation of Moses was specific largely to the Jewish people. And Jesus was very clear about this, about how he was extending it. And Paul explained in his theology about the grafting in of those who were not at first part of the covenant,
well,
how they were
I
given.
think there's a
So
difference in that too.
my point is, yes, it's the same source. Yes, it's the same essential spiritual lesson. I would even say it is the same eternal covenant, but nonetheless, there are specific covenants made with specific people and not with
Exactly.
other people.
And that's where I was going to go. And you hit my point for me. And even with Noah, I mean, it's an oversimplification. This is beginners for Quran. We just look at Noah as the rebirth of the covenant, that covenant you're talking about. There was this whitewashing or this all of this, and here goes the rebirth. What those laws were not washed away because these laws had to carry on for the next generation of people. Even supporting, an idea, again, there was a saying that one of my professors used to say, and I used to think that they were synonymous. And I'm going to entertain the audience with this because it's simple, but it sounds complex. And I was asked, what is best, to do the right thing or to do what is right? And I'm like, huh? What is best, to do the right thing or to do what is best? And
Or what is right?
I mean, what is right? Do the right thing or do the right thing or what is right? And what I've discerned from that over the years is, and each one of us, regardless to what our scripture is, I'm a firm believer, because I've studied all 3 books for numerous years. If I give you a verse out of the Bible, you should be able to show me something similar in the Torah and in the Quran that reflects that sensitivity, that articulation, that expression, that injunction, provision. If you can't, then we have to question whether or not this was legislation from God. And so, in saying that question, in Islam, we have this thing called firqan. It's a word called firqan in the verses in the Quran. And firqan is that criteria to be able to judge between right and wrong. And it's an innate ability that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed everybody with. Some, in English language, we call it the conscience. Like if I'm going to do something and then just, And now their question is, I'm going to do this anyway, and I'm willing to suffer the consequences. Are you really? Because if you're really just willing to suffer the consequences after you do a thing, then why do you dread it when you get caught? Or why do you dread it when there's a bad they're like, oh, I knew I shouldn't have did it. Then why did you do it? Again, but then we're in the situation where, and this actually happened, and I don't want to speak about something, and my wife is not here to tell her side of the story, but she was driving down a road, and a truck veered from the two-lane highway, and a truck veered right in front of her, just missed her, and tumbled over into the woods. And she stopped, and we're in the country. We're not in the city. We're in the country, farmland and everything. And like, what do I do? Her first reaction was to call for help. And the second reaction was like, do I go down into the ditch to see if this person is okay, try to pull him out? Then I'm harming. If I touch him, then I can create a bigger problem because, it may be a spinal injury or something, and I may be the cause of something greater. Or if I leave him there, will the truck explode? If I go down there, will the truck explode on me? So now these are conflicts that she had to address for herself. I'm telling this story because the outcome wasn't a positive one. And she lives with like, what could I have done that would have been different? And I'm like, you couldn't have done anything. I said, once your heart had been on doing the right thing, you called help, you did what you did, you didn't drive by and act like you, what more could you done? Even if you would have went down into the ditch, we have this thing in Islam called qadr, predestination. No matter what you would have done would not have changed this situation, hindsight, because it's already been decreed. Your action was already decreed. The outcome was already decreed. Even if at that moment, because we have what we call irada juz'iyya, partial free will. Even if you would have went down in the ditch and were able to pull this man out of the truck, do you really think the outcome would have been any different? Are you medically trained to do whatever you need to do medically to sustain life until help comes? She was like, no, there's nothing you could have done. And whether she lives with this burden or not, but at that time, it was just so hard on her. I'm like, stop. And the same thing with me. I'll share with the audience. And then, but Islam, I'm only sharing because Islam is not just a religion to us. It's our life. I never smoked. I never drank. I never abused my body. I've never used illicit substances. I've never done any of these things. And last summer, Allah decided he wanted to snatch my heart. For no reason, my heart just failed me. Speaking of your home, the place of your institution, I was in Clearwater, Florida, and I was dying. And she got me to emergency help in a small country town. They sustained my life in that, for a week, to got me to a stable, the place where they can get me to a bigger hospital. That bigger hospital got me to a specialty hospital. And today I'm living on a computer. My heart is literally a computer until a donor heart comes. And I sit there and initially I question, like, God, why did you do this to me? My job is not done. Interfaith Library is going to change the world. Like, what is wrong with you? And I have my teachers like, yo, this could be like, you dude, you're challenging God.
We're gonna take a really quick break because we got to get one more ad in,
Gotcha.
and then I'm gonna come back and tell you a story that may or may not apply, but it's also an answer to something that you brought up earlier. So an exciting conclusion to this talk is coming up to the audience. I'm going to play a
Okay.
quick commercial break, announce a giveaway, and then we'll be right back with the conclusion of tonight's talk. And I'm sure there will be other future talks. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Something or Other Publishing, or as our friends like to call us, Soup. Soup is a platform that connects authors, readers, and service providers in one convenient place. Choose Soup if you're an author with a great book idea and you're looking for a publisher offering hands-on coaching in some of the best royalties in the business. Or if you're a reader who enjoys engaging with celebrated and emerging authors. We already have over 3,000 of them, and more are joining every day. You can even win free books by voting on their book ideas. Or maybe you're a service provider and you're looking to engage with over 3,000 authors. We're here to help. So whether you're an author, a reader, or a service provider, you're in the right place at Soup. Contact us at help@soupllc.com to learn more.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God, the Role of Religion in Society. I'm your host, Wade France, and I'm here with Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam. That ad you just saw, Something or Other Publishing, one of our sponsors. Go check them out, whether you'd like to purchase books from them, contribute stories to the anthologies that they produce. I'm sponsoring one on Heaven and Hell through Something or Other Publishing. You might want to contribute a chapter to that book. Or if you'd like to become an author. Now, we're going to give away a copy of one of their books, 25 Servings of Soup, which is an anthology covering life, death, all kinds of topics that are covered by the short stories in that anthology, 25 Servings of Soup. We're going to give away a copy of that to somebody in the audience here who has made a comment over the course of the show that our guest finds the most interesting, entertaining, educational, whatever. But now back to this story. And this has an important, perhaps, metaphor related to your situation. We've been going to a senior assisted living facility for about a year. And in particular, there's a woman there from the Bahamas. I won't mention her name, but she's a very, very devout Christian, just loves God, full of the Holy Spirit, knows the Bible inside out. There are some Baha'is, or there's a Baha'i physical therapist who met her and wanted to start a discussion. And so he invited me to come because I'm a student of the Bible. And so we've been going there every Sunday for well over a year now. And this group has grown. We're now an official partner group. We go and visit all, not as a chaplain, but just as a friend. We go and visit people in the assisted living facility. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. But the point is, this woman, we were using a book that has a number of Baha'i quotes in it, studying the soul, the nature of the soul. What is the soul? What is the role of the soul? What happens to the soul after death? And we were inviting comment from, there was a person there who was a professed Hindu adherent. We've had others come and go. So we spent more time in the Bible than we did in any of these Baha'i verses. But she said after about 3 months, because the word Baha'u'llah came up, the founder of the Baha'i faith, and just in case there was anybody who was getting the idea that she might be, getting more interested in the Baha'i faith, she said, "I only have room in my heart for Jesus. I have no room in my heart for anyone but Jesus." We completely accepted that. And we said, "That's wonderful. Your heart is full of Jesus. That's awesome." And we continued on. A few months later, she made the same comment again. And then one time we were talking about how God, we were just the way we are, right? And somehow the issue of Muhammad came up. And I explained my perspective on Muhammad and the Koran, that he was also of God and that his teachings were of God and that they had transformed the lives of millions. And she reflected on this. And a couple of weeks later, in one of our meetings, she was suddenly in tears. And she said, I have been a bad daughter.
Mm,
I've been a bad daughter to my father. And then she explained that there was a Muslim man whom she had treated shabbily, that she had been dismissive of because she didn't accept that his religion could possibly have come from God or that Muhammad could possibly have been a true prophet. And apparently, this Muslim man made a good impression on her as a human being, but she dismissed him. She did not accept him in any way as a brother. And this now weighed heavily on her heart. And she was literally crying. And she said, the Holy Spirit had a stern talking to me last night when I realized that I had offended this brother.
mm.
And I wish I could go back now, then, with what I know now, and have treated him with respect. I disrespected him and I disrespected his belief in God. And I was, of course, honored to have played a small part in this. And I was inspired to say, you've told us multiple times that you have no room in your heart for anyone but Jesus. And this brings tears to my eyes to even think about it. But I said, isn't it interesting that God has managed to grow your heart larger?
Mm, mm,
Jesus,
and he did. He did that to me, and it became problematic. But yeah,
so
yeah.
this heart thing, there's something going on there, my friend. And it may relate to this question you had earlier about, well, we Muslims accept Jesus and Moses, right? Well, the Baha'i faith comes later in time, so we may have to have a heart to heart about that at some time. We're not going to have it tonight, but maybe,
No, I got it.
just maybe that robotic heart that is temporary is making way, somehow mysteriously opening things up for you know a new chapter. um our hearts can always grow larger. Our hearts are rather small,
Yeah,
right? They're rather small, they're rather weak. We only have so much capacity in our hearts, but God can grow them larger.
absolutely, absolutely. And it's, if I can close, my position on that. I just had a medical appointment yesterday. Went to see a rheumatologist, and because the circulation of blood is very important to the body. If it's not a cool, fluid, regular circulation, things can go awry. Systems can start shutting down. And I was getting this complete physical. And by the way, for the audience, I've just had surgery less than 5 months ago, 4 months ago, maybe. And I'm getting there all through the test, and they're like, "What is going on here? Like, none of your systems are shutting down. Like, you don't have the pains, you don't have arthritic issues, you don't have." And I'm like, "No, I to be honest with you, since I've had surgery, I haven't had a cold, I haven't sneezed too much. Everything seems normal." And it's a trip, kind of like what you're saying. I think, in the Christian faith, you have this thing. I don't know exactly if there's scriptures to this, or is it just something old timers have passed on. I was just doing so much, in my walk. I think God just wanted me to be still. He just wanted me to be still, like,
Yep.
concentrate on me. Your music and film career is secondhand. Somehow
Well,
learn to incorporate it,
it's Mary
but
and
but
Martha,
it's
right?
about me.
It's Mary and Martha, right? Martha was preoccupied and busy with all the service that she wanted to do, um, while Mary was just sitting at Jesus' feet, drinking it in.
So,
Yeah.
and like I said, this platform is beautiful. I know a lot of your audience may agree or disagree, maybe learned something, or maybe just came in with a dismissive mindset, and just like, I just want to hear what this individual is going to say so I can refute him later. But I'm hoping, and this is what Islam is, I mean, Interfaith Library is. When I'm invite, I'm plugging interfaithlibrary.com. I'm hoping that people come to the library, and it's We're not here to converse. And this is what's wrong with the world. We're letting outsiders of our own personal faith tell others about what our faith is instead of us telling ourselves or talking to each other. So Interfaith Library is a safe place to come, not only to learn about your own theology, all the different theologies are there. And, not only to learn about your own theology, but to learn about other people's walk. We do a lot of things. We do charitable work. But we do it collectively as a unit. I'm not trying to create a one world religion. I'm not trying to make a collective. I'm saying, come on, our motto, in the view of God, we all are brothers and sisters. We got to get back to that somehow. Whether or not you have a kufi, and I'll close on this note. I remember a Muslim sister was walking down the street and this guy decided he wanted to be atrocious and offensive. And I had to check him. He said, don't check me. You're just doing that because you defended her because you're Muslim. And I said, I'm not doing that because I'm doing that because it's the right thing. Stop doing that. You don't know anything about this woman. And then he's like, well, you don't understand about them. I said, well, let me use this as an example. I said, what's your faith? He said, I'm a Catholic. I said, do your nuns still wear habits? And he said, yes. I said, well, why do you have a problem with the sister? Because she's wearing garb. And he just froze. What's the difference in them except the Islamic garb may be a little more stylish than the nun's habit? And then he looked and he couldn't say nothing. And I said, what did the sister do to you? Have you talked to her about her faith? And he said, well, y'all don't love Jesus. And then she just went in. She's like, I love Jesus probably more than you do. And he was so humble. And I think this is what your platform allows, an opportunity, whether people agree with us or not. I'm quite sure you don't agree with everything I'm saying, but then those things that, click, you say, well, I can share, another perspective with you that supports that. And I'm quite sure there's people in the audience that's saying the same thing. I did not know that. And I encourage you, don't take my word for it. I'm going to say this, anytime you interview me, anytime anyone else interviews me, don't take my word for it. Research this yourself. Fact check. I love for people to fact check. But I will say this, and I will close on it unless you have another question. Be careful what you're researching, because you may get, you might come for dessert and you leave with a full course meal. I want everyone to be.
You might get an earful.
Yeah.
So let's look at a couple of these quotes then, because I got to give away a book. So
okay.
This is from early on. I always wondered how the translations might be considered changing the words. We don't have to have a lot of discussion about it, but it's interesting how, depending on the concepts that exist in a given language and the concept that is being introduced to people of that language, it might be really challenging to understand or to translate, especially as you mentioned, if you're going from Aramaic to Greek and then to English or Russian or whatever it then gets translated into. It's a game of, ever played telephone as a kid, right? Where you go around in a circle and you whisper into somebody's ear. By the time it comes back, it's nothing like.
Totally different. Exactly.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one from B2 Theory. B2 Theory. Aramaic accounts for only 269 verses out of a total of over 23,000. I don't know that that's accurate. I'd like to fact check that one, especially given that, as you mentioned, Aramaic was the language of the day. So, Jesus didn't go around speaking in Greek.
Well, then you have to also understand this too, if I can add to that. The true Aramaic language is one of the languages that's kind of like very few people in the world really speak today, far as the authentic. So a lot of even the Arab people who speak Aramaic today speak a dialect of Aramaic and not necessarily its original form. So maybe that's what this person is trying to convey.
Not sure. Anyway, it's an interesting comment. Love to know a little bit more. One of the people that was, very, very active in the chat, I found this one interesting from Tazi. Lake of fire, a dry lake, a desert. Because the lake of fire is a concept in the Bible.
Ooh.
I'd never actually heard it referred to in that way.
Ooh.
Is that maybe right? You'll be
Mm,
cast out into the desert, because the Azazel, right, was
mm,
taken out into the desert.
mm.
You know, when
Well, even if
the
we're
lots
talking
were
about
cast at the Day of Atonement, and one goat was for the Lord, and one was the Azazel, which is called scapegoat, which is itself a translation, a mistranslation, scapegoat, right? So there you go. There's a
yeah,
perfect example. The Azazel translated as scapegoat. And that's an
Moses was cast
example of art
into the
imitating life,
desert.
because it's kind
It
of
was,
what you call the goat, right? A scapegoat. And anyway,
yeah,
but the point is,
that's
lake of
beautiful.
fire, desert, interesting.
I'm gonna hold to that one right there for a second. That's interesting.
Yeah, is there anything in your experience about that language,
Well,
that
like I
that
said, when
analogy
I
rather?
look at it, yeah, I was referencing, like, Moses' exile. I was also um, narrative about Christ's exile. We can even go back to Ishmael and Hagar. They were, I mean, there's something about the desert and solitude and the seclusion. You're in a place where you can't do nothing but hear God, no matter what language you speak. God communes through you through nature. And that's one thing too about, and I will say this, and I wish we had more time. In the Quran, the Quran talks about many things in the early thing, the formation of the embryos, the mountains, the description of the mountains, how it holds the world together, the weather changes and things. And at the time, they instantiate, the embryo looking like a wad of gum. The mountain, if it's a mile high, it's 2 miles deep, and things like that. Now we have science that can prove these things, through sonar and ultrasounds and these things, and they like, wow. And then it's like, oh, this is a new discovery. No, actually, that was spoken about, 1400 years ago, and people were accepting this as blind faith because they were believing that this revelation came from God himself through the angel Jibril or Gabriel. If God sent this message, are you challenging it? And then again, even if you don't agree with it, what happens if you're wrong? If this comes from God and you're questioning it, what happens if you're wrong? And that's one of the things I have against the atheists. If I'm talking to atheists, I'm saying, but what if you're wrong? What harm or what do you lose by trying to accept revelation, other than just leaving to chance that your
I
way is
think
the
I
way?
think for many of them, there's a certain giving up of a certain aspect of ego, but let's not go there.
No, I got you, but I think
So,
that
uh,
goes to
well,
all of us.
we got to bring this to a conclusion, because
Okay,
we need
okay.
to do this giveaway before everybody's gone,
Well, I like the
because they won't
desert
know
thing.
that they've won the book.
That was pretty good. That was really good. And like, it's something
Well,
that
all
I would
right.
like to
So,
look into.
well, let's just
What's his name? Taz?
Tazi. Let's just declare the winner.
Okay.
If Tazi's still there, congratulations. I'll put it in the chat here for future posterity. And by the way, if you're outside the US, we may decide not to ship it to you, just because of costs, until a lot more people start honoring our sponsors. But anyway, so Tazi's still there. So send an email to info@soupllc.com. I'll put it in the chat.
Mm.
Give me just a moment here. There you go. Congratulations. Well, Tazi, if you're down in Clearwater, that's one thing, but I'm up in Wisconsin, and that's where the books are. So anyway, fabulous show with the Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam. Welcome back. We will have you back again. This has been fascinating. I have learned so much, and it's been just a true joy. Any final last words
I
you'd
appreciate
like to leave our audience with?
Well, one, I want to say thank you for having me. I know that you do a lot of great work with a lot of different religious theologies and topics. I appreciate the platform to be able to share a simplistic and honest explanation of the Quran and a little bit of the interfaith, of Islam. I want to thank the audience for even, it's huge for them just being here to hear me, whether you agree or disagree. I love to have this conversation. If anyone wants to have a more personal conversation, you can email me at interfaith_library@yahoo.com. And or leave a comment on interfaithlibrary.com in the comment section of one of the blogs, and I will get back with you. This has been an honor. Like I said, I'm willing to be a supporter of your platform. I'm always in the audience when this is not, but because I'm also learning as well, and I appreciate that. I think we all are one united community, no matter where we sit on this panel. And I'm humbled, and I thank you all, and I thank you, Wade. I'm really gracious. I'm really humble.
And I've just posted the URL link to the interfaithlibrary.com in the chat as my closing contribution. Thank you for serving up a rich and delicious discussion here to inaugurate the Nowruz celebration, the end of the Baha'i fast. I hope everyone else has enjoyed this half as much as I have.
Her name is Liz, so give her a shout out.
Yes, Liz, thank you. Thank you. So one last thing, and I almost forgot, and I'm glad I didn't. I have to tell you what we have in store for you next week. I just got to find my, like I don't know if any of my guests have this problem, but I probably have 1,000 links open on my computer, and I'm right now looking for the one that has the list of guests. So next week we have Craig Ireland from Down Under, and he is a dynamic evangelical conservative Christian and a devoted church planter. I'm thinking this is a pre-recorded show. I think I already recorded this with Craig a few weeks ago now in preparation for the show. Anyway, Craig is a fascinating conversationalist and electrifying individual. Can't wait to oh no, we recorded the sneak peek. I still got to get with him and pre-record the show before next week. So I think we're scheduled to do, I'm all confused. We're scheduled to do this. It's in the afternoon for him. So this is not pre-recorded. So this is a result of the fast or something, or food coma after having gorged myself right before the show. But Craig Ireland will be live next week, and I will be in Orlando, Florida, down near Clearwater. I'm actually going to be visiting some folks down in Clearwater next week as well. But so I'll be doing this from our place down in Orlando. Craig Ireland, fascinating evangelical church planter. You don't want to miss this. And same place, same time for you in the audience, even though I'll be traveling, 8 p.m. Central Time. Created in the Image of God, episode 91 with Craig Ireland. See you all next week. My friend, Imam Mekye Abdus Salaam, I love saying that name. I am so grateful to you, and I'm wishing you God's richest blessings in your journey.
Likewise, and thank you, Wade, and thank your audience for me.